I think good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to share my screen now, and we could start. Let me just share my screen. Okay, that's it. Okay, so for our today webinar, we're going to be working on how to configure workflows in Microsoft Dynamics 365. There are basically two different ways to configure workflows. The first one is the traditional one that probably is the one that we are going to be covering today. And the second one is with Power Automate. I already have on a scheduled webinar. I think that it's going to be in 3 or 4 weeks that I'm going to talk about that Power Automate because I want to cover both sides. But today I want to cover the workflows, the basic ones or the main ones. There are some specific functionalities that you could cover with this functionality, and there are some others that probably you need to use the other one, the Power Automate. But as probably I can say that with this one, with the traditional workflows, you could do almost everything that you could do with the Power Automate ones. Um, Workflows uh, automate business processes with our user interface. There are some functionalities that you could configure directly from your CRM. I mean that you could configure functionalities that are going to be activated automatically when some events happens in the system or when some actions are in progress by the user. So that's the main functionality of the workflows. Just activate that functionalities. Uh, I'm gonna go back a little bit. Is that in the webinar title, I just include how to create or how to manage workflows by demand. But my idea, uh, sorry, but the idea of this webinar is just cover all the whole process. I mean, how to create a workflow from zero and how to activate it as a on-demand workflow. So I'm going to be explaining all of that elements in this webinar. Just a quick video that I want to share with you is basically is presenting why our customers sometimes just quit. Uh, it takes like 2 minutes. Okay, so basically the video presents us that most of the time the clients or the customer just quit because of the of the quality of the attendance of the services. So it's just a small reflection, but it's something that really we need to uh, understand and try to figure out how to just keep moving to a good service. Okay. Let me. Okay, let's start with the topics now. I'm going to present you the agenda. The idea is that we are going to be covering five main topics. The first one is going to be general information related with workflows. The second one, I'm going to explain you where you could just find the workflows or how to do it. I'm going to be jumping from the presentation to the CRM. There are some elements that I want to show you directly in the CRM because in a PPT file, it's not the same. So I'm just going to take this as a base, but the idea is just keep moving to the CRM to present you the real information or the real process. Some general information that I want to mention because I think that is really important to make you know that there are some elements that you have to keep in mind. When you configuring a workflow, you have four major areas to consider. The first one is define or when to start them. So there are some moments or some events that could trigger the workflow. So you need to be aware or you need to have clear when the workflow is going to start. The second thing that is really important is should they run as a real-time workflow or as a background workflow? I'm going to explain you the difference. There are some elements that are going to be totally different between of them. So I'm going to explain you that in progress. The next thing is what actions should they perform? There are some actions that you could do in a workflow. There are some of this that you could not do directly. You could just relate some custom activities that you could just develop. But I'm going to try to explain you how to use it in the standard way. That is, it's really powerful. And finally, under what condition should action be performed? So you need to define the specific condition that is going to activate the flow. So these are the main or the major areas that you need to consider. I'm going to be explaining you all of this in the progress of the webinar. Okay. The first thing is where to find it, where to find them. So how could I create a workflow? So you could do this in many different ways, basically. You can see the workflows in your organization viewing the process node in the default solution. I'm going to jump to CRM just to present you how to go there. If you are in the CRM, you could go to just to the gear and advanced settings. And when you click in advanced settings, you could go to customizations. There are two different ways to do it. The first one is going to be is going directly to customize the system. And it's a way if you want to create a small flows or small workflows that probably you want to create that directly in production or something that is really specific. But if you are implementing a project and if you are implementing a whole solution, my recommendation and I think that is totally right is that you need to do it in a development environment using solutions, using packages. And after that, just export that package as managed solution and import it in a production environment. Okay. But just for today, I'm going to explain you how to go directly to customize the system. And when you enter to customize the system, you're going to find that there is a process menu there that is taken along. You could go there to processes, and here you're going to be able to create the workflows directly. Just click on new, and you're going to be able to create a workflow directly. Okay, let me just go back to the presentation just to continue with some information that is really important. Okay, in the solution explorer, that was the option that I just explained you before, or that I just showed you before. When you create a workflow, you're going to get this window. The window is going to show you basically one, two, three, four, five sections. The first one is going to be the process name. The name of the process must be unique. And sorry, it doesn't need to be unique. You could just repeat names because basically the CRM doesn't care about that. You could create with the same name, but the idea is just try to don't do that. Why? Because after a while, if you are implementing a project with 100 of, I don't know, a lot of processes, it's going to be really difficult try to identify where are some problems in some cases. So my suggestions or what I usually did uh, is that you should name him with some convention. I mean, with some prefix, with some category, with something like that. I used to name it as I mean at the beginning I just put the prefix that indicates me if it's a real-time workflow or it's a background workflow. So in my case, I just put WRF, so that means that it's a workflow real time, and I have some other prefix to define if it's a background workflow. After that, I just put that. And after that, I just put the entity name. That is something that helped me to identify what's the related entity. Of course, you could do it just with the calling entity, but it's a really good idea. Put the entity name, And after that, you could put just the action that you want to manage with the workflow. In my case, and it's just my feeling or my thought, I don't like. I don't used to create workflows. I used to create workflows, like for example, contact creation, contact status change. There are some basic workflows that I used to create because I try to group all the elements or all the action that I want to activate when something happens. Of course, if you don't want to create like this, you could just create something like send creation notification. It's a workflow that you could create and it's going to be activated on created on a creation of a record. But if you do that, you're going to have probably 20 or 30 workflows just pointing to the same action. So that's why I don't do that. But it's something that I'm going to show you later. Additionally, you need to define the category. I'm going to explain you that directly in the CRM. You need to define the entity, and you need to define if the workflow is going to run background or real time. Uh, Let me show you this directly in the CRM. I think that's going to be easy to understand for you. Let's see. Uh, the first thing is the person's name. As you can see here, I used to have these names, like for example, WFR opportunity and create a record. So I just group there all the elements that I want to activate or trigger when a record is created in opportunity. There are some scenarios that you cannot do that because you need specific things, but most of the time it's something that you really could. Okay, the first thing is just define a name. For example, this one, contact, and let's say update, update, just let's say create record. Probably something that already exists in this instance. So I'm going to add test because I'm not sure if in this instance already exists. And and let me put just temp. Sorry. And after that, you need to define the category. The category could be an action, a business process flow, a dialogue, a web API, web client API flow, or a workflow. On this webinar, we are going to be covering just workflows. There are some categories that you could do that you could use too. Probably I'm going to include that in a future next in a future webinar. But for the moment, we are going to choose workflows. Now, after that, you need to define an entity. What does it mean? That a workflow is related directly just to one entity. You cannot relate a workflow to two or three entities. It's going to be related to just one specific entity. And after that, all the elements are related to the entity that you already select here. After that, you need to define if the workflow is going to run in background or not. What does it mean? Why should I process something on real time or on background? What's the difference? If you configure the workflow as a real time, it means that it's going to run immediately the trigger happen or the action happen. So it means that it's going to be synchronously. And if you select that it's going to be a background workflows, it means that it's going to be asynchronous. That it means that the CRM is going to activate the workflow when the CRM has the resources available, and if the flows runs well or fail, you are not going to receive any message because it's running in background. So of course, if you go directly to the workflow and enter to the sessions, you could see the error. But if you don't go there, you're not going to be able to see that. But if you configure your workflow as asynchronous, I mean as a real time, you're gonna get the message directly. Okay. There are some scenarios that I really recommend you use real time workflows, or I'm sure some others that probably is better a background workflow. For example, if you want to send a notification, something that you don't need that the user wait for the result, it's a better idea use a background workflow because it's something that is going to happen when the CRM just have available the resources. But if it's something like a validation or some restriction that you want something that you want to validate before the record is created is a really good idea having in real time. Okay, so let's create this one as real time. I'm gonna just check this. And after that, you could say if you want to create from a blank process or you want to create based on a template. Um, uh, there are some scenarios that probably you could just define a base template or a base workflow structure, but it's not common. Most of the time, it's from blank process. So for this exercise, I'm going to select blank processes and I'm going to click on OK. And the CRM is going to open the window for creation. Okay, let's wait here and let's continue with the information that I have here, just to don't skip anything important. Um, okay. Okay, after that, we are gonna get the creation window. That is the window that we had at on the other side, but let me see the information that we have here. Okay, there's a section with available to run where you could define where do you want to run the workflow. Uh, uh, you could define there if you are going to run the workflow as a brand as a background or not. Actually, Microsoft recommend this type of workflows, but there are some scenarios that you cannot have a background workflow. What it means that, for example, if you want to create a restriction that validate that when you create a contact, some combinations of fields should be there, or some restriction like, I don't know, for example, let's say that if you enter the first name and last name, the another field should contain data or something that you need to validate on that moment, should be a real time process. But if it's something that you don't care about the, if you don't know, or you do, if you don't have if you don't have the, if you don't have to wait for the result, it's a good idea. Just configure them as a background. After that, that is a functionality that was the idea of this webinar, is that you could configure as a on-demand process. When you configure a workflow as an on-demand process, on your screen, for example, in this case, in leads, if you click in flows, you're going to find the workflow there because it's an on-demand workflow. That workflow is going to be available just if the user has some specific permissions that allows the user to execute workflows on demand. That's a permission that probably I'm going to show you that later because it's really important to configure that. If you don't have that permission, even that if the workflow is configured as an on-demand workflow, the user is not going to be able to execute it. Okay, so I'm going to go through this functionality later, but it's something that I want to highlight. Okay. Additionally, you could configure as a child process. There are some workflows that probably you want to call from another workflow. Let's say that if you create a workflow, and I want to mention something that is really important there. If you create a workflow, for example, on the contact creation, you could do the general validations there. But after that, or at the end, probably you want to call an additional workflow to send a notification. That notification could be in the body of the main workflow or could be in a different workflow and you could just call it. Okay. Why should I use child workflows, or why should I include the all the process in the main one? You should use a child workflow if it's something that you are going to be calling in different scenarios. So you mean if that notification, if you're going to send that notification on the creation, but on the changes status and on some other events, it's a good idea create as a workflow that you are going to be calling as a child process. Okay. But if it's something that is going to happen just one time, just include that in the body because it doesn't have any sense. They create an additional workflow for that. Something important that you have to keep in mind is that if you create a main workflow that, for example, is real time, And from that workflow, you are going to call a child process. Even that if the child process, if you configure the child process as a background, the execution is going to be managed by the main one. I mean, if the main one is real time, even that the second one is on demand. I mean, it's a background workflow. It's going to be real time too, because the main one is real time. So you need to keep in mind that. Probably there are some scenarios that you don't want to relate the flows because you really want one in one time. I mean, in real time, and the other one in background. So it's something that you need to keep in mind. There are some options of workflow retention that I'm going to explain you that in the screen. Probably I'm going to explain this in the screen because it's easier to understand. Okay, we are here at this moment. We are going to create a workflow as and I told you before. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to. Okay, probably it's kind of not totally clear, but I'm going to try to don't jump a lot in the screen, so probably it's going to make the video better. Uh, okay, so when you are going to create a process, you need to define a name. As I recommend you, you should put a prefix or something that identifies what exactly happened in the process. You need to activate as a process, of course, and you already define an entity and a category. After creative workflow, you cannot change the entity, you cannot change the category. It's something that is going to be just at the beginning. So if you want to move that, probably you need to delete the workflow and create it again because it's not something that you are going to be able to create. Okay, activate. As you can see here, there is an option that say run the workflow as a background. It's not checked. And if you want to change it as a background, you need to select this button, and this button is going to change the workflow as a background, and you are going to be able to run the workflow as a background workflow. Uh, if you want to use as an on-demand process, in this case, let's say that we are going to activate this functionality. And if you want to call this workflow for a different process, you need to activate this. Okay. After that, you're going to have a functionality here, workflow log retention, that usually we activate this to allow the CRM save the log of their workflows that probably were activated but failed. Okay, the CRM is not going to remain the success execution on the log. It's just going to be the failed ones. So it's something that I used to recommend to activate because probably if you create some workflows as background or real time actually, probably you are going to need to be able to identify the logs of the execution. Okay, after that you're going to have some option for automatic process. The first one is going to be the scope. The scope identify that if you want to execute it with the user level, with the business unit level, or with the organizational level. It means that if the user that is executing that has a specific permission as a user level, the workflow is going to have the same permission level. Okay, so usually when we create a workflow, we use the organizational level just to avoid some permissions issues. But if you really want to create that as a user level, you need to be aware that the users that are going to execute the workflow must have specific permissions that probably you already identify. Okay. After that, you need to activate or you need to define the trigger. Okay, what means probably I have that information here. The scope. Okay, start when that basically is the trigger. That is this information. You need to define that if the workflow is going to be activated when the record is created, or when the record status change, or when the record is assignated, or when a specific field change, or when a record is deleted. Okay. In our case, we are going to create this when the record is created. Of course, it's going to be possible to call it on demand, but If you want, for example, you could just click here and you could select additional fields just to activate the workflow when some specific fields change. Okay. If you're going to activate when the status change, you just need to select this one. Okay. Additionally, you need to define execute as. You could execute the workflow as a user. I mean, as the user that execute the action. For example, if I create a record, the CRM is going to execute the workflows as me because I'm creating the record of the person that is creating the record. But in some cases, you want to execute the workflow as the owner. In this case, if you go to administration, you are going to see that the workflow is going to have an owner. Why do I need to execute something as the workflow owner? Because probably the action that I'm doing is going to require additional permissions or additional action that just the owner of the workflow probably has. Okay, it's something that you need to define, and it's something that is going to be related with the experience that you have. But at the beginning, it's something that is important. I used to create this as the owner of the workflow just to avoid permission issues, but it's not required. It depends on the functionality that you want to implement. Okay. Um. Okay. Let me see here. Execute as that. I really I will explain you this. Okay. Before go to the security context situation, let's explain you how to configure the process. So, for example, let's say that I want to just fill it out automatically a field with the information that I receive on the creation. Let's go to the creation just to let me see the fields because I don't remember the fields that I have here. Let's see. Let's create a record. Let's say that, for example, the email is not required, but I want that if the user uh, don't include the email, just put something by default, something like that, something that is not usually, it's not something regular, but just for the example. Okay, so what I'm gonna say here, I have to add a step. You could insert the step at the beginning or at the end. I mean, before or after an action. By default, it's going to be before. Sorry, by default, it's going to be after. And you need to include, for example, in my case, in my example, I'm going to cook a check condition. When I include a check condition, what I'm saying to the CRM is that it needs to validate something. So, for example, in our case, I'm going to tell him that if the email, let's say that contact email, if the email doesn't contain data, okay, that's my condition. That is a really simple one, but you could do as complex as you need. But in my exercise, I'm going to use the simple one. And if the email it doesn't contain any data, I'm going to update a record. So you could create additional records, update records, assign records, send an email, start a chat workflow, perform specific actions based on a base of action that the CRM already has. Change the status or just stop the workflow. Okay, it's something that you could do. And additionally, if you customize some specific custom pieces, you could just call it by default. Actually, as you can see here, we have an Optimus specific library here with a specific functionalities. So it's something that is a little bit more advanced, but it's something that you could do. Okay. In our case, we are going to update a record. Just update a record. Sometimes take a little bit. And here you are going to be able to set properties. What it means that you are going to have access to all the forms. And let's say that if the email is not, it doesn't contain any data, by default, you are going to put, for example, uh, I don't have something like that. I don't have art uh, test. gmail.com, something like that. It's just an example, of course. Don't do that. And you could just click OK, and the CRM is going to fill out this field with this information. You could do a lot of things here. You could just clear a field. You could just relate some information from different sources. You could do a lot of things here. Okay. After that, you just need to click save, and that's it. Basically, we already define a condition, and we already define an action that is going to be performed when the condition happens. Okay. I just defined this, and it's going to happen when the record is created. Okay. You just need to save this, and you just need to activate the process. Okay, that's basically the main process. Just activate it. Uh, when you click on activate, sometimes take some seconds, some probably going to take, and it's going to ask for that I want to activate it. Okay, let's activate this. And as you remember, we define it as a real time. Okay, and it's going to be directly activated when I create a record. Let's say, for example, here, I'm going to put, let's say, Jorge, and just another one, and let's say this one. And I'm not gonna fill the email. That is the field that we are interested. So if you could save, the CRM is going to create a record. It's taking some minutes, some seconds. And the CRM is going to evaluate the condition and is going to include the information that I define here. It's a really simple example here, of course, but you could do a lot of things with theirs. Okay. As I mentioned, if you go to process session and the process fail, you are going to see the information here. Let's try to do something to make it fail. Okay, let's try something before. I'm going to delete the email here. Oh, I'm going to delete. I'm going to say the CRM is going to be deleted. Why didn't he include the information here again? Because the workflow was configured just to be executed on the creation. I'm not created the record anymore. I'm just updating the record. So that's why the CRM is not doing the validation again. But if I want to activate the validation again, I could just click here and just go to flow. And let's wait. It's loading. Okay, as you can see here, we have our flow here. Okay, why the flow is appearing here? Because I select that it's going to be an on-demand workflow. So if I click here, the CRM is going to ask me if I am sure to do that. And it's going to do the same validation. It's going to do the same process that I already defined the workflow, but it's going to be activated manually. Okay, that's something that you could use. Sometimes there are some functionalities that you want to enable for the user, but you don't want to. Well, there are two ways to do this. You could configure workflow. Of course, if it's a workflow that you are going to enable for the user to activate by themselves, probably have this name is not a good idea because it's going to be real confused. But if it's something that is going to happen automatically, it's a good idea just have a name with the prefix. But if it's something that the user is going to execute manually, usually, it's a good idea have a name like this. Okay. So if you want, you could create workflows to enable some functionalities, some additional functionalities. Sometimes or some customers prefer or likes this functionality. I sometimes I prefer just modify this ribbon and add some buttons with a specific functionalities. That is something that is possible too. But if there is a lot of if you want to include more functionality, probably it's a good idea just have workflows. Okay. How to do, for example, let's try to do something to make the workflow just have an error. What can I do? For example, if you wanna update the workflow, you need to deactivate the workflow. You cannot change the workflow if it's activated. Sorry. You need to disable or you need to deactivate, and after that, you are going to be able to modify your workflow again. Okay, let's try to do something to make it just fail. I really don't know what can I do to make it fail. Probably uh, uh, it's more difficult than I thought, but let's try to. I don't know. Probably just what? Okay. I didn't found what exactly can I do, but basically, if you do something in the workflow that generate on a specific error, the workflow is going to execute with errors, and after that, on the process session, you are going to be able to see what happened with the workflow. Okay. So probably let me try to see if we already have here a different process. So for example, if you want to see what process you already have, you could go directly to processes. The system is going to present you all the processes that are available in the instance. By default, it's going to present you the processes that you create. You could sort the information based on the primary entity, that is the entity related to the process. As you can see, by default, the CRM has a lot of workload. At least in this instance. Probably in your instance, it's not going to be like this. Let's see this workflow that probably has some fails in the history. It doesn't have one. Let me see, for example, this one. Okay, unfortunately, I don't have any other workflow with issues, but basically, there you are going to find that because it's the way to do it. Okay, let's continue with the presentation just to make sure that be sure that all the information is provided. Something important: when a background workflow is configured as an on-demand process and is started by a user using the room workflow, that is the button that I show you, that action that the workflow can perform are limited to those users that could perform based on the privileges. So what it means that, sorry about that. So if you go directly to the CRM, let me show you this. If you go to security, the user should has a role with a specific permission. Okay. I used to, no, I don't have it here, but I usually create a specific role name manually. Let me show you that. It's going to be probably it's going to be on business management, and there is a functionality here that you need to activate just to allow the user execute workflows manually. But probably I didn't see it at the moment. Activate, execute, activate real time room flows. I think that is this one. But probably I could confirm and send you that information. But you need to have a specific role that allows you to activate the workflows manually. When a background starts, when a background workflow starts based on the event that workflows operate, the context that is going to pass to the workflow is going to be the context of the user that they use in the process. What it means that if it's a user with a specific permission level, the workflow is going to be executed with that permission level. That's something that you have to keep in mind. Um, well, what else? A workflow can only be edited while they are deactivated. That is something that I already explained you. Uh, A workflow can be only activated or deactivated by the workflow's owner. I mean, no everybody who activate or deactivate a workflow. Just the person that created workflow, or I mean, the owner the owner of the workflow is the person that is going to be able to activate or deactivate the workflow, or a system administrator, of course. Okay. Um, Okay, what else is important here? Well, basically, that's the main configuration that you need to keep in mind or that you need to know to manage the workflows. I'm going to, there's an additional functionality that I used to activate because, well, I'm going to explain it. If you go to the flow, to the workflow that we just create, that is this one that say, okay, like this. At the moment, it's on draft. Okay. As I mentioned before, if it's on a small workflow that you want to configure directly in production, that is something that I don't recommend. But if it's just if that's your case, it's a good idea just activate the workflow and that's it. But if you are working on a realistic environment with the best practices recommendations, you need to do that workflow in a development environment. And after that, export that as a managed solution and import that in the production environment. If you do that, it's a good idea. Check the workflow before activated. Go to manage properties and select false here. Because with this functionality, you are going to avoid the end user to change the workflow directly in the production environment. So the recommendation is modify all the workflows in your development environments, avoid or activate this to avoid the users to change the workflow directly in the production environment. And after do that, activate the workflow. That's the procedure that we should just follow. And that's something that I really recommend. But it just apply if you have that environment. I mean, if you have development environment and you pass that to production. But if you are doing modification directly in production, it doesn't have any sense. Okay. So after that, you just need to activate the workflow and that's it. In my case, I'm going to delete this. Uh, Before delete it, if you want to do additional functionalities, like probably more complex functionalities, like let's say create an email or something like that, that is not much complex, but it's more than update a field. You could just send an email, for example, here. The CRM is going to send the email without any problem. So you could send an email here. The CRM is going to ask you to define if you are going to create a new message that is from blank, or if you are going to use a template. Probably you want to use a template. And if you select the template options, the CRM is going to request you the template name. Okay. It's going to ask you define the template that is related, and it's going to tell you, it's going to allow you to define where is the template, who's going to send the email, what kind of template do you want to use. There is a lot of elements there. Something that is really important, and please try to keep in mind is that let's say that I include this line here, but I want to include a validation condition just before to include this. You cannot do that. If you want to do that, you need to delete this. You need to add the the logical condition, and after that, add this line again. So before add a line, you cannot include a check condition and move everything there. It's not possible. Okay, and sometimes takes me some time to just repair some workflows. So try to don't do that. Okay. Uh, well, basically that's the main functionality of this. Of course, you could just do more complex things as soon as you understand a little bit more this. But for this first part, I think that we are good with the information that I provide you. As I used to do, you have this instance, this CRM instance available. It's an instance that you could try. You could just go there. There is the user. That's the password. You could go there, create workflows, try by yourself. I mean, the idea is just try to do it by yourself because with this information, you could go directly to use YouTube and see the same information on probably more specific information, but you need to try it. If you don't try it, you're not going to learn that. Okay. You have any question or do you want to have any suggestions or any directions? Just let me know. I'm available. I want to help you, of course. And that's it. thanks for your time and for your participation today. I wanna see you later in the next webinars. We are going to have more exciting topics. So thanks everyone for your time and have a great day.